Tonight on Currents News, the body of Christ outdoors, a sign of hope in the middle of the pandemic.
Pastors are taking to the streets, bringing the Blessed Sacrament to their parish neighborhoods. I'm Emily Drewby, and coming up, I'll share with you the special way they're helping Catholics.
Protests are growing across the country against staying at home as workers struggle to make ends meet without a paycheck. Plus this.
Only a handful of people in a church that fits hundreds as the Orthodox Christian community fights to keep an Easter tradition alive. I'm Jessica Easthope, and I'll have the story.
U.S. seminarians are getting ready to join the front lines in the battle against coronavirus. Hear their mission. And how to keep your finances safe in these troubled times. Be prepared, says one expert, because you just might miss it.
Get yourself ready for the next move upward, because that's going to happen, and it's going to be quick, and you might miss it if you're not ready.
Good evening, I'm Christine Persichetti. Strength that comes only from Christ is being brought home to parishioners in the Diocese of Brooklyn. The Blessed Sacrament processing through parish neighborhoods to comfort families coping with the coronavirus crisis. Currents News' Emily Drewby has the story from Howard Beach, Queens.
A sign of hope, of community, and of faith. Clergy from St. Helen Church in Howard Beach taking to the streets, processing with the Blessed Sacrament, bringing the church right to their parishioners' doorsteps, but from a safe distance.
The people here miss their church.
A unique way to give a benediction to the sick, to see their parishioners, and to make sure they're reaching out to everyone, including those unable to tune into the church's popular live-streamed masses.
But we also have an elderly population that is not watching online.
The church's pastor, Father Francis Cola Maria, says the idea came from the past.
Historically, this has been done during plagues. Processions of popes and bishops going through their dioceses or their parishes.
They will continue to do this every day starting at 1:30 p.m., taking a different route until they have covered the whole parish. And St. Helens is not alone. Pastors all over the country have been doing this as a way to stay connected with the faithful, including in Brooklyn. On Sunday, the celebration of the Divine Mercy at Shrine Church of Our Lady of Solace in Brooklyn included the visitation of the Blessed Sacrament through the streets of Coney Island, spreading an important message to their parishioners.
They are not alone in their suffering. That is the best message we could communicate through the best medium of the church, which is the Holy Sacrament, the Eucharist. God is visiting them to give them the healing, to give them the consolation, to give them the peace that they need at this time.
Just another way priests are creatively changing their approach when it comes to spreading the faith during the global pandemic. In Howard Beach, Emily Drewby, Currents News.
The coronavirus crisis is crushing jobs, and people now without work are worried about feeding their families. Catholic Charities Brooklyn and Queens hosted its second pop-up food distribution operation Friday in Corona, Queens. The community is at the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak. Catholic Charities prepared 1,000 bags of food to feed a family of 3 for 3 days. Everything was handed out. Days earlier, Catholic Charities distributed 750 food bags. Opposition to COVID-19 stay-at-home orders is building from coast to coast. Protesters are hitting the streets because they want to go back to work. Protests in several cities are growing, from Ohio to Minnesota and Washington, calling for an end to stay-at-home orders. Those measures were put into place as a way to help limit the spread of the coronavirus, which has infected more than 750,000 Americans, according to Johns Hopkins University.
Just by staying home, your actions may have, and likely did, save lives.
But it's also crippled the U.S. economy, with 22 million people filing for unemployment in the past 4 weeks.
The system is designed, and I feel that it's like rigged, against the working class people.
Rick Sanchez worked at a hotel in Florida. He joined this caravan of laid-off workers protesting unemployment rates. It was organized by their union, which represents 7,000 South Florida housekeepers, servers, bartenders, and cooks, to name a few.
They call you for the bills. We don't have money to pay.
Most have not received a dime since filing for state and federal unemployment.
Some people are understanding, some people are not. So bills have to get paid, and we paid our unemployment, and we need it now.
And not everyone is ready for things to reopen.
I'm just grateful that Governor DeWine has kept us safe in the actions he's taken so far. And the curve has been flattened in Ohio by the efforts of everybody.
Some health officials and governors say a lot more testing is needed before restrictions are eased.
With all due respect, I think there's anybody who thinks we're doing this just to take away people's liberties and rights isn't looking at the data that we're looking at. We're doing what we're doing to try to save lives.
Harvard researchers say about 150,000 people are being tested daily, but they say that needs to be tripled before it's safe to reopen the country. And a disagreement over coronavirus testing is what seems to be standing in the way of a deal being made in Congress to provide $450 billion to replenish a loan program for small businesses. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says negotiations between the Trump administration and Democrats were not expected to finish today. Senate leaders scheduled a session for tomorrow at 4 p.m. Democrats want the government to establish a national testing strategy. And stay with us. There are some simple things you can do to keep your finances safe despite the virus crisis. We'll hear about them from an expert that's still ahead in this newscast. The one-day death toll in New York is below 500 for the first time since April 2nd. Although 478 people did pass away from the disease, deaths in the state are down for the 6th straight day. And new cases of patients infected with the virus is the lowest it's been in a month. The 4,700 who tested positive is the smallest since March 21st. Earlier in April, there were more than 9,000 positives a day. The state began conducting antibody tests today to help determine just how many New Yorkers contracted coronavirus as officials eye a plan to reopen the economy. 3,000 state residents were randomly selected to receive tests from the Department of Health to determine if their bodies have built up an immunity to the virus. The results are expected by the end of the week. The governor has said that this will be the first true snapshot of how many have been infected. Hospitals across the state are also expected to deliver results from the much anticipated hydroxychloroquine tests to both the Food and Drug Administration and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. About 20 New York hospitals administered the tests, and the governor ensured the first batch of results would be sent over today. There's been an ongoing big debate over the drug, which the president has touted. At the same time, some physicians have warned it still needs to be studied to see if it works and if it's safe. Meantime, an important Easter tradition for Orthodox Christians flourished in the night this weekend. Despite the difficult times we're living in, Christ's resurrection was celebrated at Brooklyn's St. Nicholas Antiochian Cathedral, but in a different way. Currents News' Jessica Easthope has the story from Borum Hill.
Be gracious, O Master, toward our sins and have mercy on us.
A church that's pitch black. It represents the tomb where Jesus was laid in the days leading up to his resurrection. This is how the Orthodox community begins its Easter celebration every year. But unlike years past, this time a camera has replaced the cathedral's parishioners.
To not have the people there for the Easter vigil out in the street proclaiming the resurrection gospel was very surreal for us.
Due to the coronavirus pandemic, St. Nicholas Antiochian Orthodox Cathedral in Borum Hill was nearly empty. The only people present was Father Thomas Zane and his family. Father Thomas is fighting to keep the usually interactive tradition alive against all odds.
Usually all the people at the church would come up with candles they'd been given at the beginning of the evening and light their candle from my one candle and process outside.
Parts of the Paschal Vigil that normally require parishioner participation went on anyway. Father Thomas reenacted entering the tomb to discover that Jesus is risen.
The priest comes out with the one candle and chants,
"Be lifted up, ye everlasting gates, and the King of glory shall enter in."
And then the once dark church is illuminated. Every light is turned on and every candle is lit, proclaiming the resurrection. Father Thomas said when everything returns to normal, he hopes his parishioners continue to illuminate their homes with the Word of God, proving that during times of darkness, Jesus is the light. In Boerum Hill, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
In normal times, about 200 faithful attend the vigil at St. Nicholas. This year, more than 250 families tuned in to the live stream of the Mass. In Kansas, the executive order banning people from gathering for Mass has been overruled by a federal judge. On Saturday, a temporary restraining order was granted, allowing parishioners to step into church this Sunday. This applies to only the 2 Protestant churches that filed the lawsuit. Churchgoers still had to follow social distancing protocols. And while those churches can open, 2 global events are being suspended. Pope Francis postponing the World Meeting of Families and World Youth Day due to the virus. A Vatican spokesperson says the World Meeting of Families, originally set to take place in Rome in 2021, will now be pushed back 1 year. The same goes for the World Youth Day celebration in Lisbon, previously scheduled for 2022. The event will now take place in 2023. Hundreds of thousands of Catholics are expected to attend both events. There's a lot more news headed your way, focusing on finances. The virus has put a dent in everyone's wallet. Coming up, an expert tells us what we should be doing now to protect our money. Plus, protecting migrants, what some prominent Catholics are doing to keep them safe. And Singapore's surge, why the Asian country is seeing new cases of coronavirus after getting the crisis under control.
Now you can help us put your faith in the news. The next time you capture a newsworthy event, send us your pictures or video. It's easy. Go to netny.tv/send us, and you may see your submission on Currents News.
The coronavirus has created a worldwide health crisis, and with it, a growing financial crisis that is directly affecting the people of New York City and the entire nation. And though everyone is fearful for their physical and financial well-being, there are things we can do right now to help blunt the impact. The stock market teetering, businesses shuttered, people out of work. The coronavirus pandemic and the financial chokehold gripping the country have people scared.
It was like apocalyptic.
Managing your finances during this potentially devastating time economically can be stressful, but experts like Achilles Larea, founder and CEO of Larea Wealth Management, say don't panic. Now is the time to get your money in order.
I tell people, let's first look at our savings. We want to have around 6 months of savings piled up, ready to go for scenarios just like this. Forget about investments for the moment. Forget about anything else. Once that particular guideline is reached, then you can start thinking about the other things.
Other things, including a plan to stabilize your financial future. Do not run from creditors. Prioritize bill payment and spending, and make adjustments to your 401k only if necessary. And if you do have investments,
you want to make sure that you don't make any dramatic moves at this moment. I see a lot of people have soaked out, and that's one of the worst things you can do, unless you need the money right this second.
And though no one can estimate when the country will reopen for business or what the long-term economic impact will be, the time to plan for any eventuality is now. And if you can, be bold.
This is the time to be brave, to go after what you want, and to go above and beyond what you think is possible in your own world.
While hard to predict, many financial experts like Larea believe that the economy should start to rebound by the fall, but that the real headway won't happen until at least the first quarter of 2021. Across the country, people who can no longer afford to go to the grocery store are overwhelming food banks. Hundreds of cars lined up bumper to bumper for miles in Texas to pick up donations at one food bank. Many of the drivers have lost their jobs because of the pandemic shutting down their workplaces. Without paychecks, they have nowhere else to turn.
We're seeing a lot of folks out here that have never had to seek food assistance before, so we're very sensitive to that.
This really is going to help us a lot because we don't have no income at all.
No income?
No, none of us is working, and we have kids, and they don't know that we don't have money to support them.
In some states, the demand has been so great, the National Guard has been called in to help food banks with distribution. Pope Francis is warning against a worse virus of indifference to the poor after the pandemic. He says we can learn a lesson now that no one is invulnerable and everyone needs help.
Siamo tutti fragili, tutti uguali, tutti preziosi. Quel che sta accadendo ci scuota dentro. È tempo di rimuovere le disuguaglianze, di risanare l'ingiustizia che mina alla radice la salute dell'intera umanità.
This was the second time Pope Francis left the Vatican during the quarantine to celebrate Divine Mercy Sunday at a Rome church. The plight of migrants is close to Pope Francis's heart, and now a number of prominent Catholic leaders have joined a grassroots campaign releasing a plan to protect migrants during the COVID-19 pandemic. The five-step plan calls for the rapid release of migrants in detention centers, new measures to stop the spread of the virus in those centers, access to testing and emergency care, a guaranteed right to asylum, and investments for public health systems, food, and income support for vulnerable families. Joining us now to talk more about this plan is national correspondent for the Tablet and Crux, Christopher White. And Chris, how did this effort come about?
Well, Christine, the Hope Border Institute down in El Paso, Texas, and Faith in Action have been on the front lines sort of advocating on behalf of migrants for many years now. And I think increasingly what we've seen and heard over the past few weeks as this pandemic has raged on, consistently they've said that migrants are on the front lines of the most vulnerable populations. And so I think this is sort of a rallying cry as they see the situation getting worse for everyone, including migrants, that something must be done now. And their desire was to come up with a succinct list of demands that they could take to local and national leaders to, hopefully get something done.
Now, these 5 points aren't necessarily anything new in terms of what church leaders are calling for. So what's the motivation to bring them all together now?
Well, you're right. The U.S. bishops and these organizations have sort of identified these principles for, decades even in terms of the church's response toward migrants. The impetus now, of course, is that, just last week we saw a situation where the U.S. deported a number of migrants back to Guatemala. When they arrived, many of them tested positive for the virus. And so there's this, I think, general concern that if we don't do something now, trends like this will continue, and both the migrant population themselves will be at risk and others. And so this really does, in their view, benefit everyone.
All right, so what's the likely effect of this effort?
Well, when I spoke with Dylan Corbett, who runs the Hope Border Institute, he painted a sort of bleak picture of the situation on the ground there, saying that many migrants are wary to approach public health officials to get the help that they need. But at the same time, there is sort of a sense of optimism that you've seen so many people coming together, some 50 Catholic organizations, about a dozen cardinals and bishops, a number of religious men and women sort of saying, hey, this is the time to shine a spotlight on this population and action is needed right away.
All right, Christopher White, national correspondent for the Tablet and Crux. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Christine.
Singapore was one country that seemed to have the coronavirus crisis under control. That was until cases doubled. There are now more than 8,000 confirmed cases in the country, the most in Southeast Asia. The new infections are coming from crowded dormitories where migrant workers live, a population that went unnoticed by the government until now. Authorities have moved to isolate the clusters, place workers in better living areas, and provide more medical care. And around the United States, gas prices keep dropping. Right now, AAA is reporting that the average price for a gallon of regular is nearly $1.82. But in some states, including here in New York on Native American reservations upstate, some prices at the pump are under $1. Analysts say the cost of crude has plunged below zero for the first time ever, and they predict the cost of gas will just keep dropping. Midwives are also reporting a renewed interest in home births here in the United States. So the American Academy of Pediatrics has released new guidelines for the birthing process. The guidelines say pregnant women are considered eligible if they do not have any pre-existing conditions. However, some doctors are arguing it's safer now to have a baby in a hospital even during the COVID-19 outbreak because emergency response times have been backed up. And just a quick note about our Friday segment, Ask the Doctor. Dr. Bob Tabali will be in on Friday to answer your questions about the coronavirus. Send them to askthedoctor@desalesmedia.org. Again, the email is askthedoctor@desalesmedia.org. And still to come in this newscast, schools may be closed, but not for seminarians. We'll tell you how they're preparing to be on the front lines. And
here comes the sun.
And I say it's all right. The message from these singing priests just ahead. Stay with us. The pandemic is shutting down not only churches and public masses, it's also putting on hold new priestly ordinations. Still, seminarians are getting ready to join the front lines. Melissa Butts tells us about what's happening at St. Vincent de Paul Seminary in Florida, where the rector says the future priests are safe.
Safest on so many levels. One, physically, two, spiritually, that our seminarians are continuing to be in formation, to receive the sacraments on a daily basis, to continue with their studies, spiritual direction, formation advising, and really take to heart this moment in time of the need for prayer for our world.
They practice social distancing, placing sticky notes on the pews in the chapel to make sure each person sits far enough apart. The only staff is the kitchen staff, who take their temperature each day before coming in. Seminarians also have noticed various changes.
Our seminary actually brought on to the faculty a priest who graduated and was ordained last year, who once had a career in the fire department, who was an EMT for over 20 years. So now he is here on campus as well to help us as a community, just in the event that any need would arise.
We have masks that each of the seminarians have, and so we're encouraged to wear those, at necessary times. We've been taking more responsibility in cleaning, doing cleaning of the chapel, high traffic areas.
In the midst of this time, the seminarians say they're receiving the sacraments with a truly grateful heart, since so many do not have access right now.
The desire to come to the Eucharist, to hear their confessions heard, but are incapable of it because of these times. And it allows a different dimension that I've never thought of before.
For us to remain quarantined, there will come a time when our seminarians are ordained, they will be on the front lines. But for right now, our job, our pastoral ministry, is to prepare well for the priesthood of Jesus Christ.
Like everyone, they look forward to the day when life will return to normal. But until that time, rest assured of the seminarians' prayers and continued formation to better serve the faithful when this pandemic is over.
Melissa Butts, Currents News.
And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us, because we are putting your faith in the news. We leave you tonight with an uplifting message delivered in song by two priests from the Church of the Epiphany in Miami, Florida. Good night.
Here comes the sun, I say, it's alright. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun, it's alright, it's alright.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter, everyone.